Hi, Chris McClune here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of our podcast. Today, I am going to be talking lighting with Gabe Casucci, who is the Director of Sales, Fire and EMS for SoundOff Signal, and Damon Marati. He is the Director of Product Management there. We're going to be talking a little bit about SoundOff's products, particularly silicone lighting. We're going to be talking, give a quick brief background on SoundOff Signal, what it's all about. And we're going to talk about how SoundOff Signal can help you as you enter the process of speccing out a new rig and that new rig's lighting. So gentlemen, thank you both for joining me today. Gabe, I was going to start with you. Could you just give us a brief background on SoundOff Signal, where you've come from, how long you've been on the fire side of the business, where your facility is, where your products are manufactured, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you. And so SoundOff Signal, we're based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. We've been in business since 1992. Some of the things we were known for early on was the headlight flasher. So we know how prominent that is in the business, but we've come a long way since then. Roughly about 550 employees, give or take, around there. Manufactured product in the U.S. Very proud of our family-owned business still. The family is still involved in our business. So we were heavy and primarily into the law enforcement market early on in our days, a lot in the amber market as well. And as some of the people on this podcast listening will know, that we launched into fire back in 2019, so at the height of COVID, or at the beginning of COVID. I've been with the company for 8 years, and I specifically oversee development of end users and dealerships that are specific to the fire and EMS market. So we have a team dedicated to that, and then we also have a team dedicated to fire OEMs to really help streamline in that process when a customer is speccing out a new apparatus and they want a seamless process of utilizing our product. We make sure it's easy for not only the end user, the dealership selling it, and the manufacturer building the product. So that's a little bit about SoundOff.
So before we jump into the silicone end of this, you mentioned how 2019 is when you kind of entered the fire side of the market. You've got a relatively fresh set of eyes, on the editing side of the business. Anytime we do content, we always want to have a second set of eyes, because they often bring a different perspective. And here, you're kind of a fresh set of eyes on the fire side of the market. Given lighting in general, I guess, on the fire side, is there anything that you've identified as areas that can be improved on our side of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we noticed and what drove us to get into the fire market was customers that were using us on command vehicles, or customers that were volunteer firefighters and also worked in law enforcement or DPWs utilizing our product and seeing the full function and feature. They started asking for it on their larger apparatus. So yes, we launched in 2019, but Damon can attest to, we probably had a few years of development in before that. So we didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, we're launching into fire and this is what we're going to provide. It took years of identifying the correct product, identifying the function and features that we'll get into later that some of the customers were requesting, and then the development, the testing. Damon was a big proponent of the development and the product releases that he'll get into. So yes, to answer your question, Chris, customers were thriving for something new and innovative when it came to apparatus warning. Our competitors make great stuff, but customers were wanting more, multicolor technology, synchronization, just different function and features that we were offering on command vehicles and police vehicles and things like that. So that's where it led us. It was one of those things where we listened to the customer and we were here to offer solutions.
Now, Damon, we've talked a couple times here about some of the products that we're going to be getting into. The one that we're going to focus on here is the silicone product from SoundOff Signal. I was wondering, on a broad scale, could you just talk about silicone lighting in general, some of its benefits, and then we can get into Empower specifically, and also is SoundOff the only lighting company out there that has a silicone product?
There's a lot to talk about there. So I'll answer your questions one at a time. So, I mean, as far as silicone lighting goes, like what's the main benefit of it? There's quite a few. first and foremost is going to be the optical clarity. So silicone, it's not like traditional polycarbonate. You don't get any of the problems that, let's say, UV causes with polycarbonate. UV is primarily what makes poly turn yellow, and you'll get that cracking and that crazing over time. Just picture an apparatus or any emergency vehicle for that matter that's been out in the field for any sum of time, 2-3 years down the road, and you start seeing the lenses turning yellow. That's something that doesn't actually happen with silicone. So that's where we talk about the clarity of the light over time, over longevity. Additionally, you have on top of that, the one thing that causes that yellowing in traditional polycarbonate, UV from the sun, that one item actually makes silicone clearer. It's almost like a cleaner for silicone. So one thing you can count on with silicone lights is you're typically going to get lights that are, if they're in the sun for any amount of time, I mean, they're going to always stay clear. So vehicles just driving around, that's going to actually add to the benefit of the silicone light. You had a third question in there, and I can't remember, but the other big piece of it is, optical clarity also transfers into more optical energy coming through the light. So polycarbonate itself is almost like a barrier. So you do lose some light to polycarbonate, whereas with silicone, we can have, the lens and the cover and everything else is all one.
Talk a little bit about that, how the optic and the lens are combined. And then as a second part of that, just to follow up, does that mean you're actually getting more light output from a silicone lens, or does it just mean that it doesn't have that barrier that you were just talking to? So I guess first talk about how the optic and the lens are combined. Because that's an interesting part of the silicone lighting.
So let's start with actually what some of the other products in the market do. They typically, like, if they have some level of silicone on them, it's a silicone optic, but then there's a polycarbonate lens put in front of it. We've basically taken the lens and the optic and we've merged it together. It's all molded as one piece. So there's really no light loss, at that transition between, if they have a silicone and then going into polycarbonate. And then in many cases, there's just no silicone at all. And it's just LEDs with a polycarbonate lens, typically with a reflector or some sort of tear optic. And that's kind of built into the, into the polycarbonate itself. So this is essentially designed with the optic and the lens as one piece, which means you're going to get the highest level of energy output from the light itself.
Water protection. How are these lights? But whenever I think of silicone, I'm thinking of the silicone bead, that goes around my shower or something like that. So these have got to be built somewhat for water protection.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the best parts of our design is how the silicone lens, so we'll call it the lens and the optic, how it's actually attached to the light. So when we look at a traditional light, you've got a polycarbonate lens and it's bonded with some sort of adhesive. What we're doing actually is our lens or our optic and lens assembly has a lip on it. And that lip sits in between the light board that has the LEDs on it. And then you've got typically have a heat sink on a light to pull heat away from it. So it sits between those and then it's compressed as part of the assembly. And that essentially it's basically creating a gasket out of the lens itself, which is something you're not going to typically find. In most cases, you've got a polycarbonate piece, you've got some sort of gasket, whether it's an adhesive or let's say something like an O-ring. And then you've got the frame and the heat sink, and then you have the light engine. So we've essentially taken three of those pieces and turned them into one.
Gabe, you mentioned multiple colors. Could you talk a little bit about what color combination SoundOff offers with this product?
Yeah, so not only this product, but one of the nice things about SoundOff Signal is, if not all of, but most of our product is custom configurable. So any of our lights can be configured the way the end user would like it. So we don't just make a standard red, white, blue, or a red, amber, blue. If the customer wants red, amber, white, he can do it. if they want red amber green, blue amber green, whatever the configuration may be, rest assured we can build that custom configuration over for you.
And I want to actually add to that. One of the key things talking about custom configurations is we can actually send your lights to you pre-programmed. So each one of the lights has 3 trigger wires on it, and each of those 3 wires can do something different, and combinations of those 3 wires can also do something different, and all of that can be pre-programmed before it ever leaves our building.
Yeah. So some of those function and features is what Damon alluded to, is what the customers were asking and thriving for. They wanted warning with also a built-in scene light function, so a built-in scene override or a built-in traffic directional. Utilizing the light for multiple functions and features is what we were able to provide our customers now. So with that being said, yes, we do offer multicolor. We offer from single, dual, tri, and if people are still using it, split color. So we give you an option to match your spec, but we also give the customer an option for new innovation and some new features compared to what's been out in the market the last 20 plus years.
I want to talk a little bit about the lights on the vehicles themselves. We are, most of us, or many firefighters are accustomed to what the polycarbonate looks like on the side of the truck. Talk about how these look on the vehicles, and then talk about their durability once they're exposed to what's going on outside. Talk about their durability. Damon, I'll throw it over to you on that one.
Sure. So one of the key things about silicone, and it's almost like an instant recognition of our lights, is they have kind of a jeweled look to them because of the optic and the lens all being one piece. You get light transference that's just kind of coming through it, but even if the light's off, reflections, things like that, it almost looks jeweled. So it's clear. It's kind of like if you look at a clean cut diamond, it looks very clear. Silicone has a very similar appearance to it. It's almost like diamonds. In addition, all of our lights have the same depth to them. So when you're talking about lights mounted on an apparatus, typically you've got different depths of lights based on what it does. If we look at some of our competitors, they'll have one light that might be an inch thick, so it's basically protruding from the apparatus by about an inch, and then they'll have another light like a scene light that's maybe an inch and a half or even 2 inches thick. So they're doing that basically to create space for their whatever their optics are behind the lens. That's another advantage of the kind of the all-in-one design of optic and lens. All of our lights are the same thickness. So when you're looking at the apparatus, as far as a profile goes, whether it's a 7x3 or a 6x4, or even a bigger 9x7, they all have a very similar thickness to them that provides, it's just a nice clean look.
What about, getting into the durability of them, also, what about the temperature reaction with silicone? Does that differ from the more traditional lighting that we're used to?
Yeah, in most cases, polycarbonate, I mean, it's a plastic. Silicone is not. I'm just going to use something like a utensil you would have in your kitchen as an example. Many of us have a silicone spatula or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you can literally put that on a hot surface and not have an issue with it. Whereas if you took something like plastic and stuck it on that hot surface, you're going to get a different result and probably a bad smell in your kitchen. So that said, you kind of get the same thing out of a silicone light. It's got higher heat resistance. We test it to, a specific number, and that's, I think we claim 50 or 70 degrees higher than everyone else's, but we know from customer reports, things like that, it's actually far higher than that. So on scene, at a fire where there's heat, car fire, whatever it might be, rest assured these lights are going to handle that job.
So let me add to that point, Chris, real quick. So this is where the customer should be asking themselves, why does that benefit me? So from somebody who, with my team, works with a lot of large agencies and departments, one of the things we've constantly heard is, our lights on our aerial bucket or our lights that are placed on the truck that get too close to the structure. They're smoldering or they're starting to melt due to whatever heat impact is hitting it. So rest assured with the silicone lights, if you mount this on a bucket or an aerial, whatever conditions um, that that aerial specifically is doing, it's going to hold up to. Okay. Same thing if your apparatus is close to a structure, you're not going to get any sort of smoldering or anything like that. And then take it a step further, brush trucks, wildland units. With everything going on in the environment today, with how popular wildland fires are right now, this is the light that will hold up. Okay, whether it's high heat directly near the fire, um, any temperature climbs, so high humid areas, low temperature areas, it's always going to hold that dexterity. Negative temperatures, things like that. So it is, when we say durable, it's this light was built for fire.
Now, we've talked about a lot of the capabilities. We've talked a lot about the design. We just talked about the durability. But the one thing that will come up often, as we're starting to generate our specs, is NFPA compliance. Is silicone lighting technology NFPA compliant?
Yeah. So, real quick as well, when we launched into this, we put a team together dedicated to make sure we were compliant with all the NFPA 1900 needs as far as warning and scene goes. So there was an annex put out that, and their recommendations rather than mandates, that silicone could be used on apparatus. So we are okay there. We check the boxes there. We do obviously make polycarbonate lights as well. Our team did all the calculations. We worked with third-party testing, our own testing. Some of our smaller lights actually exceed candela output requirements when it comes to certain zones by even utilizing a smaller light than the traditional 6x4 or 7x3 in certain spots. So rest assured, we are compliant when it comes to NFPA standards. And, we can offer customers and dealers and OEMs compliance certification certificates for their binders, etc.
I want to get a little bit more into the specification end of this. And Gabe, I'll start with you on this one. How does SoundOff Signal assist fire departments in the specification process when they get to that lighting stage? And that can come from a variety of different places, like working directly with them, or the fact that or just creating awareness that you work with every manufacturer that's out there.
Yeah.
So like, I guess just talk a little bit about, how you can help, how the company can help fire departments when they're at the lighting stage of their specification.
Yeah, so absolutely. So my goal from day one when we launched into this was, as a person who has spec'd out apparatus for my own department and was a part of a purchasing group and saw all the complications involved with it, lighting sometimes is, we've spent so much time on this item, let's just push it off and click whatever is available there. So rest assured, one of my important things to offer the end users and the dealers was a dedicated team. So with that being said, we put a dedicated team of regional fire managers in each area of the country. With that being said, we have about 50-ish field employees that are out there meeting with end users and writing specs, things like that. So what we do is we are set up to come out to your location via Teams, whatever it takes, and write a tailored spec for you from bumper to bumper. And that includes a rendering that shows lighting placement, suggestions, opinions. Our team is made up of industry experts, people that come from the industry, they're end users themselves, or were end users at a time in their life. So we want to make it streamlined and easy as possible for all parties that are working with this apparatus spec.
When we get into that, though, beyond what you just said, there's going to be a lot of back and forth between the apparatus manufacturer and the fire department. Damon, I'll start with you on this one. It was it's like just to set up. We did a webinar recently where we talked about how one decision on a fire truck changing a tank size, for example, the change in going from one size tank to another in terms of the purchase price of the tank is one thing, but there are dominoes that fall. And so the addition of cost to the whole rig could be more just by making that one change. So what I'm getting to here is, what I asked the presenter was what question should I ask the manufacturer or the salesperson, so that I don't get the cost of the item, I get that overall cost. So I guess what I'm asking you is what should end users be asking the OEMs in terms of available lighting packages and how to select them. And this almost gets into the light output and all the different terms that are out there. So how should they be approaching that with the OEMs? What questions should they be asking?
I think a key one is, let's start with how do I get SoundOff Signal on my rig? That's probably question number one that we're the most interested in. But aside from that, as we start, as I start going down that I'm actually, you said dominoes, but I'm gonna say it's almost like a rabbit hole, right? Of questions. Probably the big ones are, what's the light output? How does it compare to the others? You start getting into, further customization. What are my customization options? And this is where I think a lot of people discover, dual color, tricolor. Most fire apparatus out there are, I would say most of them are probably single color, and then there's a small percentage that are dual color, and it's probably a teeny little bit that's tricolor, but it's an option now that they haven't had. So that's another thing that they'd want to inquire about. I'll let Gabe talk a little bit about the zoning and how to determine the outputs per zone and everything else on the apparatus. I think that's an area that he actually excels in. And so those are a couple questions I would ask, and then potentially the normal ones for NFPA, like what's the power draw, things like that, because that's all built into the what's the maximum ampacity that you can run through that system and still be compliant. And most of our lights don't really draw a whole lot of power. I mean, they're LED, they're fairly low demand.
Yeah. So again, stepping back to part of that question is all the manufacturers from small, medium, large size up, they do know who we are. We've worked with them on projects throughout the country and internationally. So they're well aware of us. We've already had the technical, the engineering trainings with them. They're already using our product. What it takes is the customer requesting it, okay? Every customer needs to know you do have an option. What's presented to you typically is a default option, depending on whatever manufacturer it is, and that dictates maybe a drop down of pre-approved lighting layouts and products. At the end of the day, it's the customer's vehicle, and just as you're making tweaks within your pump or your doors or anything, you do have that option when it comes to warning and scene lights. And it's just very important to know that again, that our end users know that all manufacturers know about us. We're still in the process of getting out and touching and seeing all the dealers out there, so they're familiar with us and know us. But as far as some of the engineering and costs associated with changes and things like that, again, early on working with these projects with Damon, we expressed how important it was to make it seamless on the OEM side of things. So our bolt patterns match up to industry size bolt hole patterns. So there was the product we laid out there currently, there was little to no engineering changes needed by our OEM partners to support our product. So we want to make it easy for them in that aspect. We added things like internal flashes or internal flashers. So the customer does not need to spec in an external flasher to sync lighting up on their vehicle. So all those things that our OEM partners are aware of, they know that we're an option. They always reach out if there's any sort of question. And again, we have an OEM team dedicated to it. So as my team is out there and writes the specs and gets it out there and gets approved, then our OEM team takes it over and really continues that relationship to make sure it goes smooth. And that team is responsible for, programming function and features. That's one of those things that we take care of and help with if there's above and beyond request of what they want done, as well as on-site training, support, things like that.
Damon, you mentioned light output, and if I were to ask you about light output, is there kind of an education that comes along with that versus just throwing a number at me where like I don't really know what the number means? Is there like do you guys kind of go that extra mile to make sure that I'm not just giving you a number of light output. I'm explaining why that the number is what it is. I'm explaining why it's important, things of that nature.
Oh yeah, I'm actually glad you asked this question because this is an area that I think this industry, and it's not just this industry. We see it in off-road. We also see it in the amber industry, but the questions of lumens comes up all the time. Like this light's got 20,000 lumens. This light has 15,000 lumens. The key thing that I want to point out is lumens is typically a measurement provided by the LED manufacturer. So this LED makes, let's say, 300 lumens. And then let's say you've got, 20 of those at that point, right? So now your light's 6,000 lumens, but that's before you've put it on a board. That's before the light's actually running and heating up. And then that's also before you put a lens onto the light. And the lens is essentially changing, how the light is focused. So lumens are not really an accurate way to tell, how a light's going to perform. They can tell you the total amount of energy that the light's going to produce. And then lumens in that case is basically a measurement of energy of light, essentially. But it tells you that. But that's it. That's like the end of the story of lumens. So we've gone and done other measurements that we've seen in other markets, like lux or candelas. And lux is a good way to basically tell how much energy is actually being projected. So lumens doesn't tell you that. It's just I have 20,000 lumens, but where's it going? It doesn't tell you that at all. So lux is a key one for determining that. And we typically see that like measured at like 10 meters away. And then they'll have like a 1 meter square box on a wall and basically how much light's falling into that box. Or if your target location's, the ground or something like that, like in the case of a scene light, we purposely have, even though it's sitting flat, the light's actually pointing slightly downwards to cast across the ground. We'll measure it based on that distance and get an actual measurement of lux. And then candela is the other measurement that we typically do. And that is more of a, lux is essentially at this distance, a 10 meter distance, you're making this much energy. And we can also test it out further. Whereas candelas is more of, how much light's going in a specific direction. And it can be a bigger arc to basically gather that measurement. And we'll grab all three of those. Like, so we'll have the lumens, we'll have the lux measurement, and we'll also have the candela measurement. So it kind of paints the whole picture of like, yeah, okay, my 20,000 lumen light is pointing in this direction and it's pushing this much energy out, this far away.
I'm going to throw this out to both of you. I'm going to start with Damon on this one. And that is, as we start to round this up, just advice. What advice do you have for fire departments that when they are beginning to spec a new rig and its lighting? Are there any, I guess, general rules of thumb they should go by as they're doing that? What advice do you have, Damon? I'll start with you.
In general, I think the biggest thing is getting with with our sales rep. They're going to basically be able to walk you through the whole process, walk you through the differences and the intricacies between lights. If you're using a dual color and considering a tricolor, obviously they can give you an idea of, what the additional cost might be to do that. And then how would you program it? Like, we can help with all of that. And that's probably that's probably the biggest asset right there is using us, basically, kind of, you know, to quote from a movie a long time ago, help me help you. And so using us to basically help you spec your, you know, your apparatus.
Gabe, how about you? Any words of advice?
Yeah, the biggest takeaway from this podcast should be that the customer knows that they do have options on your apparatus. You know, that's one thing we can't stress enough. Utilize us to help you leverage that conversation with your dealer and your OEM. Just know that you have options. We're going to tailor it to the needs of your department. So if it needs to be the exact equivalent, we'll make sure that happens. If you're looking for more, we'll make sure that happens. You know, let your team members know that we're at all the major shows, obviously FDIC, EMS World. We try to be as many state, regional shows as we can. Our team is out there and dedicated to serving the needs of your department. And our mission at the end of the day is getting you there and back safely. That's the overall mission of SoundOff Signal. That's how it's always been, and that's how it always will be.
Yep.
All right, perfect. Well, again, my thanks to you both for sitting down today. You know, lighting is a tough one sometimes as you're diving into those specs. So it's good to know, you know, that there's help out there. And that, you know, like you just said, you know, there is, you know, since 2019, an additional source or additional choice on the fire side of the business. So again, this has been Chris McClune with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. If you do want to see our podcasts archived, they are all archived at fireapparatus.com/podcast. So again, my thanks to you both. Have a good one, everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you.
You.